Hello? Welcome.
This is the two cities.
Oh, I'm so excited.
In 1626, a trading village populated by American Indians was transformed as European fishermen arrived at Cape Ann, Massachusetts. Roger Contant led the group to survive for 2 years, but a new man, John Endicott, replaced him on orders by the Massachusetts Bay Company. Contant stepped aside, and the new planters and the old planters agreed to cooperate. It's this story that led to the naming of the colony of Salem, a Hellenized version of the Hebrew word for peace, ironically. Puritans, religious refugees, came to Massachusetts in search of a place to practice their religion freely. While it may sound as though they would understand and accept religious pluralism, they were one-sided in their view. Strict laws were put forth to enforce Puritan religious practice. Modern Salem is now known for a brief time in the town's history. Hysteria, accusations, and executions have scarred this town with a history that overshadows all else, a sensationalized history that bleeds into all things related to Salem. In reality, much of Salem's acclaimed history belongs to the nearby town of Danvers, what was once Salem Village. Salem Village also included the modern towns of Beverly, Middleton, Topsfield, and Wyndham. Other accusations and trials were carried out in Salem Town, Ipswich, and Andover. But Salem remains the place people visit to come into contact with history, the story of the wrongly accused, the accusers, and the panic that's been described so many times it's palatable. When I was a young girl, I became infatuated with the Salem Witch Trials. So much so that 8-year-old me wrote a story about witchcraft set in Salem, Oregon, because I thought it'd be cool to bring the witch trials to the West Coast. I read all the books I could, this was before the internet, and I remember feeling so entangled in the narrative. There was something so fascinating about the idea of panic, accusations, and a faulty judicial system. I was compelled to understand the situation, one that, to young me, didn't make much sense. The Salem Witch Trials have been an example of the country's most infamous case of mass hysteria. It's been used as a cautionary tale of the events of religious extremism, lapse in the due process of the law, isolationism, and a lack of tolerance. But what is real and what is legend? What is Salem like? I had the opportunity this winter to visit Salem, Massachusetts with my good friend Hannah. Those who listened to the Halloween Marathon of Minis will remember that our episode featuring Maine and Oklahoma was for her. But not because she's from those places. She grew up in rural Massachusetts, just 20 minutes from Salem. In this episode, I'm going to share the history of Salem and the discussions Hannah and I had both before and after visiting. We were sitting in her parents' home, which is just 20 minutes from Salem.
So there are kind of like two parts to Salem that I always had growing up. And I think, so one part is obviously the witches, and then the second part is sort of like the hardcore maritime history. And, you know, it's kind of funny. I do remember taking out a book about witches from like the elementary school library when I was like in first or second grade, and my mother being like, that's inappropriate, let's put that back. And I remember being like, but why?
The Salem Witch Trials were a series of hearings, prosecutions really, of people accused of witchcraft in the Puritan colony in Massachusetts. The trials took place between February 1692 and May of 1693. In all, 20 people were executed, 14 of them women, and all but one by hanging. No one was burned at the stake, though one man was pressed to death. There were 5 other victims, 2 of which were infants that died in prison. A witchcraft craze rampaged Europe from the 1300s to the 1600s. Tens of thousands of accused witches were killed, mostly women. The Salem trials came on the heels of the executions of 12 other women who'd been killed in Massachusetts and Connecticut earlier in the 1600s. It was the intent of the Puritans who arrived in Salem to build a pure society based on their biblical interpretation. But rather than a utopia of like-minded people, Salem Village, present-day Danvers, was known for many disputes over property lines, grazing rights, and other neighborly quarrels. Between 1672 and 1688, 3 ministers came and went. There was great disagreement about Salem Village's first ordained minister, Samuel Parris. On June 18, 1689, the villagers agreed to hire him, though the tensions in the village only grew, as Reverend Parris delayed his acceptance, and many believed he was unfit in Salem Village, as he could not settle disputes. This caused an increase in the tension, so much so that historian Marion Starkey suggests that serious conflict may have been inevitable. Rumors of witchcraft had been wafting through Salem Village and other towns prior to 1692. Cotton Mather of Boston's North Church was publishing pamphlets and books that spoke to his belief in witchcraft. In the memorable prophecies relating to witchcraft and possession, Mather speaks of oracle observations and how witchcraft had affected the children of John Goodwin, a mason from Boston. Mather described the oldest child as having been tempted by the devil to steal linen from Goody Glover. Glover was known as a disagreeable woman, who had been called a witch by her husband, and that may have been why she was accused of casting spells on the Goodwin children. After the event, 4 of the 6 Goodwin children began having strange fits called the disease of astonishment, which were believed to have been associated with witchcraft. These fits included a lack of control of their bodies, becoming limber or flapping their arms like birds, random outcries, pain in their throats, and incidences of trying to harm themselves. These symptoms became commonly cited during the height of the craze in 1692. In February 1692, 9-year-old Betty Paris, the daughter of Reverend Paris, and her 11-year-old cousin, Abigail Williams, began having fits that were described as beyond the power of epileptic fits or natural disease. The girls screamed and threw things. They crawled under furniture and contorted their bodies. They complained of being pinched and pricked with pins. William Griggs, a doctor, found no physical evidence of any illness. Soon, other women were having similar fits, including Ann Putnam Jr. and Elizabeth Hubbard. The first 3 people were accused of witchcraft. Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba were arrested. Some people believe that the root of all of the accusations was the lasting bickering of the squabbles among neighbors. A family feud between the Putnams and the Porters may have led to Ann Putnam Jr.'s accusation. Good was a homeless beggar looking for food and shelter. Her status as a beggar gave her an appalling reputation in her Puritan town. Many claimed she rejected Puritan ideals of self-control and discipline, and was accused of tormenting children and misguiding children off of the path to salvation. Osborne rarely attended the church meetings and was accused because Puritans believed she had her own, not particularly Puritan, ideals following her marriage to an indentured servant. Tituba was an Indian slave. Her difference would have made her a target for attack. She was accused of enchanting girls like Abigail Williams and Betty Paris with stories from Malleus Maleficarum, which include tales of sexual encounters with demons, swaying minds of men, and fortune-telling. What is important to recognize is that each of these women was an outcast. They were isolated and were left to defend themselves. The women, once accused, were interrogated for several days, starting on March 1st, 1692, and then sent to jail. Others were accused: Martha Corey, Rebecca Nurse, Rachel Chilton, and Dorothy Good, who was just a child, the daughter of Sarah Good. Martha Corey had been skeptical about the credibility of the girls' accusations of Good, Osborne, and Tituba, which led to her accusation. These charges, and those against Rebecca Nurse, shook Salem Village, as they had been upstanding citizens. If these women were witches, anyone could be. Dorothy Good was just 4 years old, but her answers were construed as confession and implicated her mother. Soon, family members and associates were accused by association. Sarah Cloyce, Nurse's sister, and Giles Corey, the husband of Martha, were accused. Soon, Abigail Hobbs, Bridget Bishop, Mary Warren, and Deliverance Hobbs were arrested and examined. Soon, Sarah Wiles, William Hobbs, the husband of Deliverance and father of Abigail, Edward Bishop and Sarah Bishop, and Mary English were also arrested. On April 30th, Reverend George Burroughs, Lydia Dustin, Susanna Martin, Dorcas Hoare, Sarah Morey, and Philip English, Mary's husband, were arrested. 36 warrants were issued for people who were arrested following the issue of these warrants, including Sarah Dustin, Ann Sears, Bethiah Carter Sr. and her daughter Bethiah Carter Jr., George Jacobs Sr., his son George Jacobs Jr., his wife Rebecca Jacobs, their daughter Margaret Jacobs, John Willard, Alice Parker, Ann Puriter, Abigail Soane, George Jacobs Jr., Daniel Andrews, Sarah Buckley, and her daughter Mary Withridge were accused. Also included were Elizabeth Colson, Elizabeth Hart, Thomas Farrar Sr., John Toothaker, Sarah Proctor, the daughter of John and Elizabeth Proctor, Sarah Bassett, the sister-in-law of Elizabeth Proctor, Susanna Roots, Mary DeRich, another sister-in-law of Elizabeth Proctor, Sarah Peace, Elizabeth Carey, Martha Carrier, Elizabeth Fodsick, Wilmot Red, Sarah Rice, Elizabeth Howe, Captain John Alden, the son of John Alden and Priscilla Mullins, William Proctor, son of John and Elizabeth Proctor, John Flood, Mary Toothaker, the wife of John Toothaker, and sister of Martha Carrier, and her daughter Margaret Toothaker, and Arthur Abbott. In total, 62 people were in custody. On May 10, 1692, the witch hysteria took its first victim. Sarah Osborne died in jail. On May 31, 1692, Cotton Mather wrote to one of the judges, John Richards, saying, quote, "Do not lay more stress on pure spectral evidence than it will bear. It is very certain that the devils have sometimes represented the shapes of persons not only innocent but also virtuous, though I believe that the just God then ordinarily provides a way for the speedy vindication of the persons thus abused." End quote. On June 2, 1692, in Salem town, the court convened. William Stoughton, the lieutenant governor acting as chief magistrate, Thomas Newton, the crown's attorney, and Stephen Sewall as clerk, heard the first case, that of Bridget Bishop. They endorsed all the indictments against her. She was described as not living a Puritan life, wearing black clothing and odd costumes. Her immoral lifestyle was deemed an affirmation that she was in fact a witch. The same day she went to trial, she was convicted. She was hanged on June 10, 1692. Rebecca Nurse and John Willard's indictments were endorsed on June 3rd, though their trial was delayed. And following Bridget Bishop's hanging, the court was adjourned for 20 days as they sought advice from New England's most influential ministers. I'd like to think that this was a time that they reflected on the gravity of the literal witch hunt, how hysteria could overtake logic, and how, at this point, 2 people were already dead. They could have, though it didn't stop them. They issued a collective response on June 15th, my birthday for anyone who cares. It was written by Cotton Mather, and it reads, "The afflicted state of our poor neighbors that are now suffering by molestations from the invisible world, we apprehend so deplorable that we think their condition calls for the utmost help of all persons in their several capacities. We cannot but, with all thankfulness, acknowledge the success which the merciful God has given unto the sedulous and assiduous endeavors of our honorable rulers, to detect the abominable witchcrafts which have been committed in this country, humbly praying that the discovery of those mysterious and mischievous wickedness may be perfected. We judge that, in the prosecution of these and all such witchcrafts, there is need of a very critical and exquisite caution, lest by too much credulity for things received only upon the devil's authority, there be a door opened for a long train of miserable consequences, and Satan get an advantage over us, for we should not be ignorant of his devices. As in complaints upon witchcrafts, there may be matters of inquiry which do not amount unto matters of presumption, and there may be matters of presumption which yet may not be matters of conviction. So it's necessary that all proceedings thereabout be managed with an exceeding tenderness towards those that may be complained of, especially if they have been persons formerly of an unblemished reputation. When the first inquiry is made into the circumstance of such as may lie under just suspicion of witchcrafts, we could wish that there may be admitted as little as possible of such noise, company, and openness as may too hastily expose them that are examined, and that there be no thing be used as a test for the trial of the suspected, the lawfulness whereof may be doubted among the people of God, but that the directions given by such jurisdictors, such as Perkins and Bernard, be consulted in such a case. Presumptions whereupon persons be committed, and much more, convictions whereupon persons may be condemned of guilty witchcrafts, ought certainly to be more considerable than barely the accused persons being represented by a spectre unto the inflicted, inasmuch as it is undoubted a notorious thing that a demon may be God's permission appear even to ill purposes in the shape of an innocent, yea, and a virtuous man. Nor can we esteem alterations made in the sufferers by a look or touch of the accused to be an infallible evidence of guilt, but frequently liable to be abused by the devil's legerdemains. We know not whether some remarkable affronts given to the devils by our disbelieving those testimonies whose whole force and strength is from them alone, may not put a period unto the progress of the dreadful calamity begun upon us, in the accusations of so many persons, whereof some, we hope, are yet clear from the great transgression laid unto their charge. Nevertheless, we cannot but humbly recommend unto the government the speedy and vigorous persecution of such as have rendered themselves obnoxious according to the direction given in the laws of God and the wholesome statutes of the English nation for the detection of witchcrafts. The hysteria continued, though now in Salem town. On June 16, 1692, Roger Toothaker died in prison, the second to die awaiting trial. From June 30th to early July, grand juries indicted Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Proctor, Martha Carrier, Sarah Wilds, and Dorcas Hoare. Good, Howe, Martin, Wilds, and Rebecca Nurse were executed on July 19, 1692. On August 19th, Martha Carrier, George Jacobs Sr., George Burroughs, John Willard, and John Proctor were executed. Mr. Burroughs was carried in a cart through the streets of Salem to his execution. When he stood on the ladder, he gave a speech of his innocence. He did it with such a solemn and serious expression to the onlookers, finishing it with the Lord's Prayer, something that witches were not supposed to be able to say, that the audience was in tears. Some believe their tears would stop the execution, but accusers said the black man, the devil, made him say it, and he was hanged. On September 18th, more people were indicted. On September 19th, 1692, Giles Corey refused to enter a plea. The judges applied the archaic form of punishment called peine forte et dure, in which stones were piled on his chest, in an attempt to make him enter a plea. Stones were added until he could no longer breathe. After 2 days, Corey died without entering a plea. Some believe his refusal to enter a plea was an attempt to prevent his land from being seized by the crown, though Chadwick Hansen, a historian, explains that much of his property had already been seized. This was a constant concern for those accused. Many believe accusations were fueled by the motivation of claiming land and property of the accused. 4 more accused pled guilty, and 11 others were tried and found guilty. On September 22, 1692, 8 more people were executed. Temporary reprieve was granted to some women who were pregnant, and others, such as Dorcas Hoare, who were granted reprieve to confess to being a witch, though, of all of the accused, only Mary Bradbury, who was 77, escaped. She was the baddest accused witch. In January 1693, the Superior Court convened in Salem, Essex County, again headed by William Stoughton as Chief Justice, with Anthony Checkley continuing as Attorney General, and Jonathan Elitson as Clerk of the Court. The first 5 cases tried in January 1693 were of the 5 people who had been indicted but not tried in September: Sarah Buckley, Margaret Jacobs, Rebecca Jacobs, Mary Whitridge, and Job Tukey. All were found not guilty. Grand juries were held for many of those remaining in jail. Charges were dismissed against many, but 16 more people were indicted and tried, 3 of whom were found guilty: Elizabeth Johnson Jr., Sarah Wardwell, and Mary Post. When Stoughton wrote the warrants for the execution of these 3 and other remaining from the previous court, Governor Phipps issued pardons, sparing their lives. In late January and early February, the court sat again in Charleston, Middlesex County, and held grand juries and tried 5 people: Sarah Cole of Lynn, Lydia Dustin and Sarah Dustin, Mary Taylor, and Mary Toothaker. All were found not guilty, but not released until they paid their jail fees. Lydia Dustin died in jail on March 10, 1693. At the end of April, the court convened in Boston, Suffolk County, and cleared Captain John Alden by proclamation. It heard charges against a servant girl, Mary Watkins, for falsely accusing her mistress of witchcraft. In May, the court convened in Ipswich, Essex County, and held a variety of grand juries. They dismissed charges against all but 5 people: Susanna Post, Eunice Fry, Mary Bridges Jr., Mary Barker, and William Barker Jr. were all found not guilty at trial, finally putting an end to the series of trials and executions. In all, 19 people were killed. These people were excommunicated from their churches and denied proper burials. When the bodies of the victims were cut down, the crowd would disperse as the bodies were thrown into shallow graves. Oral history states some families reclaimed their loved ones to bury them on family land in unmarked graves. Before heading to Salem, I sat down with Hannah, and we talked through our ideas of Salem, what we had learned in school, and what the differences were, coming from 2 different coasts.
So there are kind of like 2 parts to Salem that I always had growing up. And I think, so one part is obviously the witches. And then the second part is sort of like the hardcore maritime history. And, you know, it's kind of funny. I do remember taking out a book about witches from like the elementary school library when I was like in 1st or 2nd grade. And my mother being like, that's inappropriate. Let's put that back. And I remember
Really?
being like, but why? And I think when I got older, I thought it was because my mom was worried that it was like just about like sensationalism, or like maybe I couldn't handle like the death or like the creepiness of it. I don't know. I think in retrospect, she probably just wanted to make sure that I was getting the history from like a reliable source, and like
It was
maybe
like actual history.
yeah, and like kind of like how she made us read about Pocahontas before we went to see the movie. We had a very Disneyfied view of history in my family. So yeah, so there's sort of like the witch side and then the maritime history side, and then the witch side has been so sensationalized, which is not to take away from those who practice, you know, Wiccan or pagan or what have you sort of religions or practices. But so much of Salem has grown up around like the tourist trade and sort of appealing to that sensationalist side, and like people flock to it at Halloween. And then for my family, whenever we went to Salem, it was always to go to the Peabody Essex Museum, which is like very much maritime history, art, culture, sort of more the history side of things. So yeah, I guess for me, Salem has always sort of represented those two things. And then I think part of what I get frustrated with them because everyone's like, witches! And I'm like, yeah, but remember, these people weren't witches, and they were mostly women who were killed because they didn't conform to whatever societal standard, and they were, it was hysteria. And these individuals, I view them as true victims. It's not like they were standing up there being like, we're witches and we're standing up for our rights. It was, please don't kill me. I don't know what you're accusing me of. This sucks. So I guess I've always sort of felt frustrated by that, because they were the whole witch. It was a witch hunt, and it was hysteria, and those victims were swept up in it, and they were victims of it.
Right.
Because they did not conform to whatever societal standards, which reminds me of a really funny, like, BuzzFeed or reductress article about, like, would you have been a witch? It's like, are you female? Yes. Do you have money? Yes. Are you poor? Yes. Like, basically, if you're, like, any of these things that is not whatever perceived ideal, you're basically in trouble for being taboo or violating these norms. So I guess I always felt really sorry for the people who were caught up in it and lost their lives to it. That's all Salem is known for, when all this other really important and cool history happened as well.
Right.
In 6th grade, we were at sort of an old school building in Salisbury, Massachusetts, and we jokingly... a door would always open in the lunchroom no matter how often we shut it, and we decided it was a door ghost, and we named him Gus.
Gus the ghost.
Gus the door ghost. He only dealt with doors.
Got it.
So Gus. And then there, by my parents' house, there is sort of walking trails, and one of them leads to Witch Hollow Farm, which is a house. I think I went to 5th grade with the people who, with the son of the people who still own it. And Witch Hollow Farm, I think there's some association with a witch. She was, I can't remember. Somebody there was accused of being a witch, or she bought it. And again, it was some sort of like, it was a female breaking some sort of...
Having power that she wasn't supposed to.
Or, yeah. I can't remember. I don't think she was hanged or anything. I think it was just sort of like, it's like on a list of haunted houses in Massachusetts. But that being said, despite that, like, whenever I drive by it, like, because it's called Witch Hollow Farm, I like have that association with it. And it's got other cool stories too, like rum runners used it, and Prohibition, dear God, thank you. So it has sort of other fun associations, or like scandalous associations like that. But like, I do get creeped out walking in those woods. And I don't know whether that's just because people described the plot of the Blair Witch Project to me, or because I'm just like, old New England woods.
Was that set in New England? I don't remember.
I don't remember either, but it, like, even, I'm such a scaredy cat that even just the description of it was enough to sort of, well, no thank you. I didn't like being in woods alone after that. But there's also something creepy on these walking trails. It's called...
Where are they?
What?
Where are the walking trails?
Like half a mile that way.
Do people go to Salem for Halloween?
Oh my god, it's like a fucking pilgrimage.
For like Bostonians, Massachusetts.
No, people from out of state.
But do people here do it also, or?
Some people might, but I mean, I would always steer clear.
Predominantly.
Like, let's go to Salem. Like when I went to school in Massachusetts at a college, and people from out of state attending would be like, oh my god, we're going to Salem for Halloween. We're so excited. And all the kids I knew from Massachusetts were like, oh, we're steering clear. Like, it's like, no thank you.
That's so something I would do.
Yeah. So, right? So, like, it's something you would do, and it's something that all the Massachusetts kids are like, nah. Because we just, like, don't want to deal with the tourists.
That's fair.
Kind of like New Yorkers, I think, probably avoid Times Square on New Year's.
As they should.
You know? So, it's sort of like, you know, it's like grass, you know, just like local bias.
Did you learn a lot about the Salem witches or the witch trials in school?
No.
Really?
Come to think of it, what we did... No. We were big on the Revolutionary War, as one is in Massachusetts. But that's sort of post, like, the Salem Witch Trials were 1600s.
Right.
I guess we read The Crucible by Arthur Miller in...
11th grade? 10th grade?
9th or 10th. I can't remember which. And so there was some discussion of it in that context. But then with The Crucible with Arthur Miller, you're in the context of McCarthyism, and it's a different... Like, the focus was more on it as, like, a metaphor or allegory for the McCarthy era.
For a more modern
political, geopolitical context, rather than about the witches.
Which is still a political context, but very different.
Well, it's so applicable is the thing. Because a witch hunt is accusing people who haven't done anything.
And it's
hysteria.
It's often single people
accusing
multiple people rather than multiple people accusing a singular person. And frequently it's people in power accusing people of not in power that have something that they want.
Yeah, or in the case of the Salem Witch Trials, it was so it was a few individuals accusing a wider swath of society of being witches.
Yes.
Whereas, like, with the sexual assault in Hollywood, it's like a gazillion women saying Harvey Weinstein did it.
Yeah.
Like, it's a little more clear cut.
Yes, which is the exact opposite of a witch hunt.
Exactly. And, like, it's interesting because people have proposed all sorts of wacky theories, too, that the grain in Salem was poisoned with that mold that makes you trip, basically, and, like, you have seizures and...
Are they proposing
psychotic
it...
episodes. And so they've proposed it as...
that the accusers or the accused?
The accusers were suffering. It has a specific name. I forget the species of mold. But I
don't know that my listeners are keen on mold
probably
species.
Don't care. But yeah, so like the accusers were suffering of it, suffering the effects of that poisoning, and then...
So you said it was wheat?
Yeah. Or in the barley or something.
But there was some kind of grain that was...
Something was,
moldy. And it was causing people to have hallucinations, and perhaps they were seeing things that didn't actually happen. And was that like a...
But they may not have even been seeing things. They were like having seizures.
And thinking that they were being cursed by somebody.
Yeah, and then, the establishment didn't have a valid explanation for that.
So obviously it's witchcraft.
So witches.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, we didn't talk about it a lot in school, which is kind of...
But you did, I mean...
Interesting.
We walked around Boston today and you knew a lot more history than I knew, not just about Boston, but about, like, the founding of this country. And so I think it's really interesting that even if it is before Revolutionary War times, it's still a huge part of the founding of this country.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and it's so close. that you wouldn't have learned about that. Or at least not, you did not learn enough about it for it to be something that's sticking in your memory.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much, like, misinformation and again, like, conspiracy theories, and people who are really interested in this, I think, probably spend a lot more time thinking about it than I do. I guess I kind of view it as, like, a historical note.
Yes. That's fair.
Some people were murdered unfairly.
Which happens a lot in a lot of places for a lot of reasons.
In a lot of places for a lot of reasons.
The men that fought for the freedom of this country and the men that fought for England were both fighting for something that they thought was right, even if it wasn't.
And it's also an interesting, like, religious artifact, because I think, obviously, there would be a different explanation or approach to that kind of phenomenon, whatever it was. Hysteria, mold-induced.
Yeah.
But, like, the Puritans just didn't know what to do with themselves.
Yes. And
again, that othering and, like, that concern with sort of a deviation in social status or what have you. And there was, was her name actually Tituba? Or was that just the character in the Crucible?
That's her name.
Yeah, so again, also a woman of color, practicing a different religion, opens up, again, like, deviation from the norm, opens up the possibility for othering, and then accusations of witchcraft or different.
Like, kids obviously hear stories and and you hear that this is haunted or that is haunted, or if you do this, that this person will get you and stuff. And you said that there was nothing really like that. There was stuff in the woods. Was there... Is it just not associated with where you grew up, do you think? Or...
Yeah, I mean...
Like, I'm just wondering, because I can't think of any... I mean, there was a house, maybe 10 houses away from mine. I lived on the busy street, and it was one of the side streets, and if you walked... My house was in the middle of the street, so if you walked to that corner and went up maybe 10 houses, there was a roundhouse, completely round.
Weird.
And it has, like, a little brick, maybe 3 feet high, brick wall around it. And there's these really big trees and shrubs, and so you can tell that it's round, and it's easier as you walk up from the other side of it to see that it's round, but it's obscured and you can't see inside of it, and it doesn't look well kept, and it was kind of dirty, and there was, like, a car covered in a tarp, and so it was very obvious that whoever lived there did not come out very frequently. My guess, it was probably someone that was older.
Yeah.
And had other people coming and bringing things to them, which of course no one saw those people. And it was said that there was a witch living there. But also, on the other side, because again, I lived in the middle of the street, so if you went the other way to the side street and went up probably like 12 or 15 houses, there was another house that was in various states of disrepair as I was a child. Like, it was very overgrown, and then they cut things back, and you could tell the house was not so great. And then there was a point where, after they had cleaned up the front yard, that the light was on at Halloween, and my mom said, "Don't go to that house. That's where the witch lives."
Oh, God.
And so my mom fed me, on the other side of the block, the same story that I was hearing from kids for the other street. And so it's interesting to me that living someplace so close to Salem that you wouldn't hear those things.
No, we didn't. I only have an analogy from Maine.
Oh.
In a small town in Maine, there was a house that basically the people who owned it never went, and the windows had rusted, so we called it Bloody Windows, because it kind of looked like blood. And so people would always be like, walk by quickly at night. But that was like kids feeding kids.
Right. The roundhouse situation rather than like your parents. Not that your parents would
parents
feed
never
you that.
said...
Your parents wouldn't perpetuate that.
No, and they would never be like, oh, that house is haunted, or don't go there, or... Yeah. I guess, I don't know, but maybe that was like a sort of weird side effect of a desire to not feed into the sensationalism.
Right.
Because it's like, it's already there. The last thing you want to do is like...
Right. Do you
perpetuate
think
that.
that's maybe why those things don't exist here?
Maybe.
Because people think of Salem as like a touristy...
I mean, I do wonder, though, if you talked to kids or parents in Salem...
If they have those
or closer
stories.
to Salem, if they maybe believe it and are like, don't do that, or don't go there, or...
Right.
Being where we are, it's like, whatever. It's all good. Although now I'm totally freaking myself out.
Why?
Because it's dark and we're talking about witches. Yeah, it just never loomed that large in my... Like, yeah, it was fascinating, but just as fascinating as the Revolutionary War, as that maritime history, as the Mayflower.
It was more historical, not supernatural.
Yeah.
I wonder, too, if maybe coming from some place that has such a deep history and is so proud of the history here, if that doesn't just become, you know, another piece of hay in the haystack.
Yeah.
Of what history is, and there's not... I mean, obviously it is sensationalized, and it is something that a lot of people think of differently than how it went. And, you know, when you say witch hunt, people think hundreds of people were dying, that you're burning a witch every day, and no, they hung
it was like 10.
less than 20 people. One person was pressed, you know, it wasn't... It's terrible, and those people shouldn't have died, but it also, I think, is probably a lot different than how we imagine it, and I wonder if maybe, having grown up in Los Angeles, where everything is sensationalized in the movies, if it then didn't become something that, for me, was even bigger, because that's how people talk about it. That, you know, Blair Witch Project is what you're talking about, and things like that. So... It probably also doesn't help to go to school with people whose parents are writers and directors and producers.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I mean, there is so much drama and intrigue, because like, there are all these wealthy shipping captains there, or like, if not wealthy.
So the real drama of Salem is all about the maritime traditions.
So there's this really famous family called the Crown and Shields. One of the men in the family, two of the men in the family, they murdered this other captain in the house where I'm taking you.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's like, it was a brutal murder, and I can't remember what it was about, but it's just like, oh my god, like, what are you guys up to? And then, something else I think about sort of in terms of like dark histories, like, so during the Revolutionary War, there were like a few sort of British, I don't know, emissaries, diplomats posted, and the residents of Salem tarred and feathered them, and they left or died, and like the Brits just didn't really bother a whole lot with Salem after that. And then also, even though a lot of people in Massachusetts were abolitionists and working on the Underground Railroad, fundamentally it was still part of the triangle trade. Because like, the sugar and rum were going somewhere, and the Bibles were coming from somewhere, and even if they weren't selling slaves, there's always sort of been like a dark undercurrent, and also of colonialism and all that stuff, you know? So yeah, it's sort of like the witches are just one part of that. Yeah, maybe the witches, for the whole witchcraft thing for me is just like, yeah, another chapter in that history that's problematic and indicative of sort of other things going on socially and politically, and kind of just the fledgling nation trying to, well, there was a colony at the time, like, trying to figure out what it is.
The final trial was held in May 1693, but the issue did not disappear from public view. For decades after the trials, survivors and family members of the victims sought to clear their names and establish their innocence. A memorial park was dedicated in Salem, with a wall with stone slab benches for each of the executed in 1692. On the 300th anniversary of the trials, a ceremony was held, including speeches by playwright Arthur Miller, who penned The Crucible, and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel. Danvers also erected a memorial. Bones that were discovered in the 1950s, believed to be that of George Jacobs Sr., were reinterred at the Rebecca Nurse homestead, where, in 1885, her descendants erected an obelisk-shaped granite memorial. In 1992, the Danvers Terracentennial Committee persuaded the Massachusetts House of Representatives to issue a resolution, and it took until 2001 for a Massachusetts legislator to pass an act exonerating those convicted, establishing them as innocent. As Hannah mentioned, there were medical explanations for the affliction of girls. One such explanation, convulsive ergotism, is caused by eating rye bread, made with grain infected by a fungus called Claviceps purpurea, a natural substance from which LSD is derived. Others have suggested an epidemic of bird-borne encephalitis, lethargica, sleep paralysis, hysteria as a response to Indian attacks, though most historians prefer social motivations, including jealousy, spite, and a need for attention. In 1689, English rulers William and Mary started a war with France in the American colonies. Known as King William's War to Colonists, it ravaged regions of upstate New York, Nova Scotia, and Quebec, sending refugees into the county of Essex, and specifically Salem Village, present-day Danvers. These people created a strain on the small town. Tensions rose as resources were taken. This added to existing tensions, creating new rivalries with ties to the port of Salem and farmers dependent on agricultural land. While the Puritans believed all of the quarreling was the work of the devil, there was also a very real social, economic, and political reason for accusation. The Salem Witch Trials are filled with instances of injustice and religious bias. Much of the evidence used against the accused was called spectral evidence, in which those afflicted by the accused witch claimed to see the shape of the person afflicting them. Puritans believed a person had to give the devil permission to enter their body, or to take their shape to afflict others. Opponents believed that the devil was able to take any person's shape without their permission. In this case, the person accused may not have given permission to the devil, and could also be a victim in the devil's work. The court contended that the devil could not use a person's shape without permission, which made the accused complicit with the devil. As mentioned, Mather and other ministers sent a letter to the court, urging them not to convict on spectral evidence alone, and later the court ruled spectral evidence inadmissible, which reduced convictions and led to the end of the witch hysteria. Though, witch cakes were also used in an effort to find those who were afflicting the victims of witchcraft. This is ironic, seeing as people were utilizing a form of magic to discover the perpetrators of witchcraft, a practice of magic. Witch cakes were introduced by John Indian, one of Reverend Parris's slaves. The use of English white magic involved making a cake from rye meal and urine from the afflicted girls. It was believed that invisible particles that were sent to afflict the girls would remain in their urine. Because of this, a dog could eat the cake and the witch would be hurt, identifying her as a witch. On March 25, 1692, Reverend Parris admonished the use of magic, including this white magic, because it was going to the devil for help against the devil. Though the initial hysteria could be traced back to Reverend Parris, his slave Tituba was believed to have taught the first afflicted girls about voodoo, though there's no contemporary evidence to prove this. Secondary sources in the 19th century, such as Charles W. Upham, claim that a group of the girls, with Tituba's help, attempted fortune-telling. They used an egg white and a mirror to create a pseudo-crystal ball to utilize divination to discover their future spouses. They were scared when they reportedly saw a coffin instead. For us, this likely sounds like girls being girls. It's common for young girls at sleepovers to play with divination. Cootie catchers, Ouija boards, light as a feather, stiff as a board, even Bloody Mary, all require a belief in magic. These are normal activities now, but then the idea of magic was so deeply connected to the devil, and living in a colony of Puritan refugees, it couldn't be tolerated. It was something to fear. Moreover, Tituba and John Indian were both slaves, people with different cultural backgrounds and religious traditions who had been picked up from their homes to be enslaved in a strange land. These people were not seen as people, but as a lesser animal. Race plays a role in these accusations. The beliefs of these white Puritans diminished the humanity of these slaves. Their religious beliefs and practices were not acceptable. Had Tituba taught the girls about divination, we'll never know for sure if she did, she was simply sharing her culture with them. But the devout Puritans could not see any beauty in religious difference. Ideology was cut and dry. Their beliefs were the only acceptable ones.
So I think 6-year-old Nikki expected it to be more central to, like, the town's identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is the naivete of innocent, like, children that, like, history makes a place, right?
Yeah.
So every place is going to be what its history was. And part of that is true, especially in the way that it has become capitalized on in that town. Mm-hmm. But it was a little sad to me to see that there was just a memorial, and there wasn't more. It may also be the folklorist in me that is upset that there wasn't more done that didn't require money to get to.
Yeah.
That there weren't signs on corners where things happened, or, you know...
Yeah, plaques.
Yeah, things like that. And so, I mean, you and I spent time trying to find the specific location that Giles Corey was pressed at. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we ever found it.
No.
I think the only thing I could find was the memorial for him where the memorial was for all of the victims.
Right.
And so that was a little disappointing.
I mean, I think people have tried to find that. I think for that, the records are just
hard to find. Yeah.
Because some of this is just, history is elusive at times.
Oh, absolutely. But even little things, like there was the witch's house, which is where the judge lived, which we visited.
That was cool.
That was cool. But again, I think the majority of that had more to do with, like, how they lived parts.
The museum itself was kind of weird and poorly put together.
Yes.
So it was more just like you paid to go to an old house.
Yes, which I was a little frustrated with, because it was like, it gives you the history of the witch trials, and it's like, yes, here's 3 cards with some information about the witch trials.
Yeah.
And I think there just could be a lot more done. And I'm not saying that they're not going to, but it's disappointing to see, like, they're capitalizing in an economic way, but they're not capitalizing in a deep history kind of way.
Oh, so here's something else I learned. So remember yesterday the park ranger said that, like, that was one of the things in Salem. Mm-hmm. There are more things in neighboring towns, because apparently the witches were accused. Most of the witches that were accused initially lived in Danvers and started to be examined in Danvers, and then the witch trials switched over to Salem.
Right.
Which is also kind of interesting, because it's like the town of Salem is capitalizing
at that time
on things that actually didn't start in Salem, which is fascinating to me.
They're capitalizing both at that time when things moved there.
Like the parish.
They get the credit for that historical event that they capitalize on now.
When, like, the parish house where the initial accusations happened is actually burned down, you can only visit
where it was.
Like, where it was.
Yeah. Which is also...
But those places do have plaques. Like, I think there's one where you, like, come back from the mall that we used to go to when we were kids, and it was just an old house, but I was, like, Googling today, and that was, like, where another one of the judges lived or something. So maybe part of the problem is that it's just really scattered, but then it's not advertised like it's Salem. All in Salem.
I mean, the only thing that we saw, admittedly, we didn't go on tours because there weren't any, because it was icy.
Yep.
We didn't go into a lot of the, like, witch museums that were very touristy.
Yes.
Which I, as an anthropologist, feel icky about in general.
Right.
But we did go to the visitor center, and there wasn't a lot on witches. No. I was looking. I didn't see much just in the town, aside from the overpriced, capitalistic, buy my herbs that I put in a sack and put a witch hat on kind of a thing. And there's nothing to say that Salem is the place where these judges lived and where these witches were eventually tried, but a lot of the accusations came from neighboring towns. You know, I feel like there's, like, this... It's like behind the curtain of tourism is this, like, evil reappropriation of history. Like, Salem takes credit for that history of the witch trials when they weren't necessarily where that credit should be given. And that's not a positive thing.
Yeah.
But it's kind of spun in that way of... That's interesting, too, to think about how many things get reappropriated, because that's how life works. Mm-hmm. Not every historic building can stay in its intact state forever, always, and serve its intended function. Like, what history gets prioritized in what ways? Mm-hmm. That judge's house was bought and capitalized upon to be a museum and done, but, like, I'm sure there's places where some of the accused lived that are demolished, like you had said.
Yeah.
There's no proof that these people were practicing paganism.
Exactly.
It's related to the magic that Tituba may have been practicing, which is a form of another religion, which is not paganism.
Right.
And yet witches today still feel a call, and I'm not unifying her as all witches, but there are witches that practice paganism that feel they must go and pay homage to those people.
I was kind of wondering about that, because everyone talks about how these were innocent victims accused of witchcraft, which sort of implies that maybe they were actually very devout Puritans.
Yeah.
Who were distressed not only because, one, they were being hanged,
right,
but they were also being accused of practicing another sort of religion that they had no interest in practicing because they were devout, God-fearing Puritans.
Right.
How frustrating that
also, how
been.
terrifying would it be if you're a Puritan and you believe that you're going to be damned to hell because you're being accused of witchcraft?
Yeah, when you've always, you thought, been a good Puritan.
Right, and you're only saved.
So
your good name is only saved when you were hung and did not get yourself out of the noose, or, tested in one way, or oppressed.
So while it's great that, witches or pagans feel that call in some way, is it are
they then honoring Puritans who were falsely accused?
Yeah, and or are they also imposing their ideas about, are they imposing
their religious ideas
on somebody who very much would not have identified with those.
Right, which is something that I was thinking about in all of those little shops.
Should we be going to the memorial and saying the Lord's Prayer over them instead?
Instead of offering them,
whatever the witches or pagans would do.
Or the New Agers, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I think there's a very exploitative pagan vibe in a lot of those stores.
Oh, for sure.
Which is also frustrating, because that's not what the history is. They're definitely not practicing Wicca there. That wasn't happening. There's some places where you go and you feel the immensity of the history there. Walking through Boston, you feel the history of the founding of the country. You feel the importance of these places. And I think part of it is because they're presented in that way. They're given this power, and they're given notoriety for what it is that they accomplished in that building, or said there, or rode his horse through wherever, right? And going to Salem, it doesn't have that same thing. This is where they're honored now for having been wrongfully killed and wrongfully accused. And here's some museums that you can go in that tell you about the history and push you through the gift shop and make you buy a $15 bag of herbs. But there wasn't the same power given to this. I didn't go there feeling like there was something important happening. Going into the custom house, it was an old building, and going into the side where all the papers were, I felt like you said, I could feel it would just be bustling people.
So we talk about material vitality in one of the classes I teach, and imagining how you would feel in those places. And I felt a lot more power and immensity and history, and I could imagine more things happening.
And I didn't feel that in the judge's house, even with all of that stuff staged as to what it would be
I felt
to live
a little
there.
Creeped out, but I was
it also was painted black, and all of the rooms were staged like it was a house that you were in.
Yeah.
But it didn't really give you an idea of who the judge was as a person in that house. There's bits and pieces where it's he would have sat here and eaten his porridge, or that didn't have the immensity to me of the historical value of the Paul Revere house.
Yeah.
And so I think that was also a little
disappointing
just because there wasn't that space for that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's valid.
The witch trials remain a remarkable event in early American history. Pre-independence, religious freedom had yet to be granted. As we continue to struggle today with what we accept and how uncomfortable the strange or unknown may make us feel, we must remember these times. Work is still being done. In 2016, the University of Virginia announced a project team that had determined where the executions took place. 19 accused witches were hanged in public there. Members of the Gallows Hill Project worked with Salem using old maps and documents paired with GIS and ground-penetrating radar to survey what is known as Proctor's Ledge. Because of this work, Salem plans to install a memorial to the innocent victims. This is promising. It's what I was looking for when I went to Salem. I wanted to see where people were tried, hung, buried. I wanted to go to the places that acknowledged the injustice and the hysteria's mistake. Like Hannah and I discussed, tourism seems to have overtaken the historical aspects of Salem. In recent years, it's even become a source of debate in the city. Some residents want to downplay the witch tourism and market Salem as more of a cultural center. As recently as 2005, conflict emerged over plans to erect a statue of Elizabeth Montgomery, the comedian who played Samantha in the classic TV series Bewitched. Some episodes were even filmed in Salem, and TV Land wanted to erect a statue to honor the 35th anniversary of those episodes. Many people felt that the statue was in poor taste, and was an inherent support of the commercial production, an exploitation of the horrendous history of false accusation. But the statue was erected, promising to promote the witch city. The witch trials were a tumultuous time. In Massachusetts, between 1692 and 1693, more than 200 people were accused of practicing witchcraft. 20 were executed, and eventually the colony admitted their mistake. It was a strange place to be, walking in the city. It felt so disconnected from the history that I'd heard so much about. I decided to confer with Ellie, so I gave her a call.
Can you tell me about your experiences in Salem?
Yeah. So I went to Salem when I was around 24 to visit a friend, and I really wanted to see Salem because it's just something you grow up with. Like, we've always grown up with, like, knowing about what happened with the Salem Witch Trials, and I used to watch Sabrina the Teenage Witch all the time. So it was something that kind of has always been instilled in my upbringing, right? So when I went to Salem, I really wanted to go, and when I did go, I had a really good time, but I thought it was so weird, and, like, there was just a weirdness, like a weird energy there when I was there.
What do you mean by weird energy?
Well, it was weird in the sense that, like, I my dad's from England, so I am used to, like, just kind of walking over cemeteries all the time, right? Like, England's just buried on top of each other.
I mean, all of America is an ancient Indian burial ground, but...
Oh, yeah, definitely, but we live in a white privileged society where we don't acknowledge that.
True.
You know? And so, I think for me, like, walking around Salem, compared to, like, walking around, I don't know, like, other old cities like New York or whatever, and walking around Salem was, like, legitimately walking, like, you know, you walk down the street, you see, like, a weird witch store, and then you're right next to a cemetery, and then there's a museum that's honoring the people that have been killed and showing how reckless we've been, but then there's this, like, tourist trap of, like, oh, get your, you know, like, I don't know, like, get your witch hat, right? So it was, like, this weird juxtaposition of, like, feeling bad about what we did, but also kind of trivializing it, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it was weird just kind of walking around and kind of realizing, like, I don't know, it seemed, it's just weird nowadays, just kind of, or not nowadays, it was weird at that stage, walking around and seeing how we feel, or how we kind of have this facade of feeling bad about, like, murdering a whole bunch of people because we were led by fear.
Right.
But we're also, like, weirdly, like, kind of saying, like, oh, yeah, we murdered all these people, but here's a witch store.
Right.
You know? Like, we're still kind of thinking that it happened and that there were witches here. And it's bizarre in that regards, just because, like, I don't know, it's like, even today, we're, like, right now we're going through a witch hunt with in regards to, like, I don't know, like, people of color, you know, like, and I just think, like, maybe in 10 or 15 years time, are we going to be having, like, you know, like museums that are like, oh, get your old Salvadorian, like, you know, like, clothes or whatever, but before we kick them all out, you know?
Right.
So it was just weird in that regards, you know? That's another thing. It's just that, like, everyone, it's like, today we still live our lives, and we still continue to, like, live our lives, despite the fact that we are ignoring the fact that we live through deep fear, you know, and fear seems to be the major component of what has made people live this long. Like, we are not governed by intellect I don't think we've ever been governed by intellect. We're only just governed by fear. I think that was another thing that was strange about the place, is that now that we watching it in modern times, people are just living over the fact that that this place used to be a place of deep fear for people that were accused and were scared to be accused, and for people that were just scared at the concept that there might be this otherworldly phenomenon that will destroy them and everything they hold dear. So I think it's just interesting that, despite all of that history, it's buried underneath the rug, and people are still just kind of living their lives.
Yeah.
And just walking over it like it's no big deal.
Salem holds a deep history, one borrowing from neighboring towns, filled with hysteria, injustice, and fear. And like Ellie said, it's a strange feeling walking on the streets of a town that isn't acknowledging that fear, the fear that modern Salem is built on, the fear of those accusing and the accused. There is a buried emotion lying just beneath the surface, never fully dealt with and still not fully acknowledged. Thanks for listening. We appreciate all your support. Please be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter, like us on Facebook, and rate, review, and subscribe on the platform of your choosing: iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, YouTube, and Podbean. For those asking, we are working on getting on Spotify. We've submitted the proper forms, though we may not have enough listeners and followers to be accepted yet, so share our podcast with anyone who you think might like it. We're working hard on new episodes, stuff that we're really excited about, and we hope that you'll enjoy. Stay tuned. Until next time.